She's here.
Oh, she is? Oh, there she is.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call to order this joint meeting of Senate Budget Subcommittees number 1 and 3 on Education and Health and Human Services. The meeting will be jointly chaired by myself and Senator Mitchell. We'll be trading off different areas in the introduction. The first couple of items I will chair, then we'll move to Senator Mitchell for issues 1 through 3 and public comment on those issues. I will then take the chair again for issues 4 through 6 and public comment on those issues, and then Senator Mitchell will do the remainder of the agenda. We are going slightly out of order today. We have a time certain for Senator Hannah Beth Jackson from District 19, who will be presenting a proposal at the beginning of our meeting. If there is no objection, and seeing none, Senator Jackson, why don't you come forward? Either at the podium or the table, whatever is more convenient for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and members. I am here not only in my capacity as a senator, but particularly in my capacity as chair of the California Legislative Women's Caucus. So I thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee on its behalf of the caucus and to present to you a proposal for reinvestment in early care and education. I believe you've gotten our letter dated March 4th. The Legislative Women's Caucus remains steadfast in our call for $600 million in the 2014-2015 budget for early care and education. We support a balanced reinvestment between rates and slots that will begin meeting our goals of preparing children for school, allowing parents to work, including those with non-traditional schedules, something that we have to recognize in this modern world with the flexibilities that we see in our workforce, the need for those flexibilities, and to provide fair pay for childcare providers. We're not going to create incentives for people to enter into this very, very important work unless we pay them appropriately. Since support for childcare and preschool is now at a $1.1 billion below the 27-28 allocation, we believe a significant investment in early care and education is necessary and indeed critical to address the needs of our youngest underserved children in California. Modernizing rates and increasing slots represents the foundation of rebuilding early care and education that was decimated during the Great Recession of 2008 through 2012. As we look to reinvest in our most vulnerable children, I'd like to highlight and suggest one possible strategy that members of the Legislative Women's Caucus believe would begin to fill the gaps that were created over the past several years within the early care and education system. We believe that our early care and education programs are an integral component of our state's education system and therefore could and frankly should be funded through Proposition 98. Indeed, large parts of early childhood education, or ECE, were funded through Prop 98 prior to the 2011-12 fiscal year, when at that point in time we started chopping the heads off of just about everything. So that this proposal, this suggestion or ask, if you will, is not without precedent. Within our general proposal of increasing slots and modernizing rates, we focused our request on the following: increasing reimbursement rates for license-exempt care providers. These provider rates must be fair and accurately reflect the cost of providing that care. Currently, the reimbursement rate to license-exempt providers is below the minimum wage. Below the minimum wage. Many parents who choose license-exempt care do so because they work non-traditional hours in the evenings and weekends, they have rotating shifts, or simply cannot find care to fit their needs. And license-exempt care may be the only option available to them and may be the only way that parents can return to the workforce. Secondly, increasing the standard reimbursement rate. Contracted centers are impacted by the increase in minimum wage requirements, which many of us, I think probably most of us, support. Increased healthcare costs, increased rent and utilities. The center Title V providers meet additional training and quality program standards and should be compensated as such. Now, giving an across-the-board increase to the regional market rate is also critical to this. Currently, the RMR ceilings are based on data from 2009. There is less a deficit factor of 10.11%, which puts rates just slightly above the 2005 level, making them about a decade behind the market. Child care programs that rely on RMR include these non-traditional hours for parents, again, who work swing, overnight, or early morning shifts and need 24-hour or weekend care, and other licensed family care homes who can offer flexible hours. We need more of this. When you offer virtually less money than we had 10 years ago, the opportunity for this to take place just simply is not going to occur. And many infants and toddlers are cared for in subsidy programs reimbursed by the RMR, and this is often the highest cost of care because you have fewer providers for each child. And when you've taken care of infants and 0 to 2s, you realize they are a full-time job. They sleep when they want and not when you want, and they're up when they want and not when you want. And that's just the beginning of the iceberg. At the current reimbursement rate, families have limited access to child care options because they can only choose from about 50% of the providers and have their costs totally covered. And we know that there aren't even enough providers, so to be able to access less than half of those that exist really creates a major problem. Additional slots for preschool and general child care. The number of underserved children has been exacerbated by the cuts that were made during the recession, and there are estimates that over 300,000 children are now waiting and eligible for child care subsidies statewide. 300,000. What do we do with these children? So even with some additional slots in the 2014-15 budget, California is still only meeting 18% of its child care needs.
Thank you,
18%. So let me just say I'm grateful to both chairs for your commitment on this issue and the opportunity to share our suggestion and for taking me out of order so that I can return to my district for some pre-planned events this afternoon.
Do you have time for just a couple questions?
Certainly.
First, the problem you address is clearly a problem. No one, I think, up here or in the audience can debate that. And the solutions you suggest are I think, very reasonable solutions. How we pay for it is always the catch. And out of Prop 98 money this year, there will be a big Prop 98 surplus, and it may make sense for one-time expenses to find Prop 98 money. But many of the items that are part of the solution, and even the solution is only temporary, would require ongoing dollars. To address that, we have to take Prop 98 money away from ongoing K-12 or community college expenses. Hard to say which is the most important. They're all important. How do you deal with that? Well,
let me suggest to you that if we start at the earliest possible age, and we know through brain mapping that the most critical period in a child's development is from 0 to 2 or 0 to 3. If we can capture these our youngest minds at the earliest possible age so that they have a quality opportunity for early education, and that's starting at the, some would argue within the womb, but certainly, and there's not much we can do there, but at the point at which we can provide them with the basic fundamentals they're going to need to be good learners, to be receptive to all of the stimuli that are necessary for growth and for intellectual development, we will, if we can get these children prepared so that when they walk into school that first day, they have heard the requisite number of words, and the estimate is 30 million words between the time that they are born to the time they start school, rather than 10% of that at best, which is what happens when they don't have quality care. If we can have these children starting off at the same starting point, we will need less and less of that remediation, because what we find happening is our underserved kids come into school, they're already behind, and they never catch up. So we can reduce the need for remediation. We can reduce a lot of those expenses that we have that we wouldn't have to have if we did this advanced education at enriching these children at the earliest possible age. So I would submit this is a preventative effort. This is an effort that will get our children to school and ready to learn at the same rate so that we don't have to spend so much time and money trying to catch them up, something which rarely happens.
Just one follow-up that other members might have questions or comments. We've heard in past years in this committee that those who have quality childcare, quality preschool, clearly start out in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade ahead of their peers, but that if you take that money out of K-12 system to the detriment of K-12, by fourth or fifth grade, they tend to fall back and be part of the normal expectancy for that peer group. I'm not the expert in the field, but would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think remembering that we actually did have this funding available prior to 2011, I would simply refer us all back to the success rates associated with that, particularly for our youngest children. There are so many other variables that enter into as children get older, and I'm not an expert in reciting those, but I can tell you that we know that if we get children to start off at a point where they've had the best possible preparation, that their opportunities for success expand tremendously. So I don't think it's necessarily, taking out of one pocket and then destroying the opportunity for that pocket to serve the needs of our children, just that we really should recognize the importance of getting these children prepared at the earliest possible stages.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mitchell?
Thank you. It's been my experience, Senator Block, that the research you quote is actually of the Head Start population. And I think it's a slightly different population. And I don't know that there have been studies looking at the longitudinal kind of impact of the way California kind of braids early care and education funding and programs together. So that really is Head Start. And I don't know that it's a real apples to apples comparison. Just to follow up on Senator Block's question, Assemblymember Garcia made a very good point, I thought, in a meeting that we were all in together this week with regard to Prop 98, when she talked about teachers. And do you recall that?
I do,
and I share that with Senator
certainly.
Block in the committee.
I think the essence of what she was observing is that if you take just your average teacher and you put into a classroom above average students, the teacher becomes an above average teacher. If you take an average teacher and you put into his or her classroom children who are really not meeting their expectations, you get a below average teacher. And I think teachers, if you ask most of them, when their children are really learning and engaged and succeeding, that inspires them and makes them a better teacher. And when they're having troubles, the challenges associated with the children are challenges that the teachers experience as well.
Any other questions or comments? Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since this is new to me, may I ask some silly questions, or
please
just some questions just up front? I'm just curious. How does California compare to the 49 other states in spending on child care? Are we unique, or is there something from the LAO's office that I could read that would...
Okay, yeah, actually, as we go on in the agenda, we'll be hearing a report from the LAO's office, and they will fill us in on that kind of data. So you may want to reserve questions more general in nature for the LAO, but questions specific to Senator Jackson's presentation, anything you'd like to ask?
I'll wait for the LAO.
Good.
Give her some grace.
Thank you. I'm much appreciated. You can be sure.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions or comments for this speaker? Seeing none, I want to thank you, Senator Jackson.
Thank you for the time and the opportunity to appear before you. Thank you.
With that, we will move on to our informational items. First, the overview of California's child care and early learning systems. And we'll call up Carolyn Chu from the LAO's office, legislative analyst.
She has a great summary. It's helpful.
And Senator Morlock and others will be receiving now a copy of the LAO's report, which will help, and you'll be walking us through that, Ms. Chu? Yeah. You'll have a lot of information, hopefully, that will address basic concerns.
Before Ms. Chu starts, can I just make a general opening comment? Because I wanted to say it before Ms. Chu presents the report that, as I've shared with her previously, is one of the best summary documents of a highly complex, multifaceted, multi-funding stream program. You know, when you think about early care and education and the subsidized child care program in California, it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most complex programs that the state is involved in when you consider the role fed, state, local government plays, when you recognize that probably everyone in not only this room, the hearing room, but in the building between members and staff, whether we're aware or not, have been touched by or engaged in this program if you have children, or if you know children, have children in your family. This is one program, one government supported program that has a direct link and is directly influences kind of the private pay side. You know, maybe in health side, you know, maybe Medi-Cal influences the private pay side. You know, I'm not sure. But I am thrilled that the full Budget Committee, as well as our opportunity for the two subcommittees to share in this, and aspects of ECE falls within both of our areas of work. But it's just really important for us to understand how complex it is based on the work of government in creating this complex system, but also in terms of the needs of working families and their children. It's a system that's driven by parental choice, which also makes it complex. And so we'll hear today from center providers, family daycare providers, you know, there's the exempt provider population. I just think it's important that as we talk about the importance of investment, that we fully understand the nature of the complexity of the program, and appreciate its need to be so in order to meet the unique needs of children and their working families. K through 12 is a very different kind of animal, if you will, but early care and education and the subsidized child care program is a critical component of the work we do here in the state of California. And I'm very glad that the Budget Committee and the Senate side is giving it its due in terms of time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Yes, sir, Mr. Stone. Senator Stone.
Mr. Chairman, nice to see you and my fellow colleagues. I'm delighted that we have this joint committee, and I was just kind of curious, for those of you that have been here for a long time, and I'm very much in support of early childhood education and making sure that moms can go to work and their kids can be taken care of and helping elevate them out of poverty. And you mentioned a very important concept that this is really complicated, and I have to tell you, being here, new like my new colleague Morlock, Mr. Morlock, Senator Morlock, going through the reports, it was, you know, quite an education for me. And I was just curious over the past why these programs weren't integrated in just to one department. I mean, we have the Department of Education, it's got part of the responsibility, the Department of Social Services that has part of the responsibility. Why isn't it just under one agency where we can collectively work and streamline and dedicate resources?
And Ms. Chu, can you respond to that as part of your report?
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
And then I'll give you the political skinny that she doesn't share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Ms. Chu.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Mitchell. So we'll launch in first to one of the handouts that the sergeant gave to you, the overview of the child care system. Given the complexity, please feel free to stop me if you have questions or something that I'm saying isn't quite being clear. So the first page of our handout talks about who is eligible for subsidized childcare. As we've already heard, these programs serve low-income working families, and the eligibility threshold is set at the 70th percentile of the state median income However, the state has not adjusted that measurement since 2007. So right now, the eligibility threshold is roughly $42,000 for a family of 3. So any family at that threshold or below are eligible for the programs. As I mentioned, parents must be working or participating in education activities to be eligible, and the children must be under the age of 13. Families who are participating in CalWORK, so they're in job training or just starting a job, are guaranteed access to subsidized childcare. We refer to these as our stage 1 and stage 2 families. In addition, once families have terminated cash aid and been in the program for 2 years, still they move into what we call stage 3. They have generally been provided subsidized childcare, but it is not an entitlement program. However, in the past few years, the state has funded it similarly to an entitlement program, attempting to capture the full caseload. Those families who are not participating in CalWORKs and have not previously participated in CalWORKs are not guaranteed access to subsidized childcare. Rather, they're served on a first-come, first-served basis effectively, with the lowest income families being served first. So as Senator Jackson mentioned, when the state had a centralized eligibility list, so a statewide waiting list, there were roughly 300,000 families on the waiting list for those programs. So moving to the second page, those families that are eligible participate in a variety of different programs. The first 3 programs we have listed here are the stages of the CalWORKs Child Care Program. Generally, as I mentioned, the stages reflect the relative stability of the families. Then there are 4 separate non-CalWORKs child care programs. There's the general child care program, the alternative payment program, 2 special population programs for migrant children and for children with severe handicaps. And in addition, there is the state preschool program. A caveat to make here is that families can participate in the part-day state preschool program even if they're not working. If a family wanted to participate in the full-day state preschool program, the parents would need to be working to be eligible for that full day of care. Moving to page 3 of our handout, what are the standards and where are children served? So children generally can be served in 3 different settings. The first are centers. Those are your businesses, brick and mortar businesses in your cities and counties. They can be served in family child care homes. These are quite literally people's homes where they have established small businesses to serve children. They generally serve between 6 and 12 children in those homes. And then there are also what we call license exempt providers. These are your family, friends, and neighbors who can provide child care services for a particular child. The first 2 centers and family child care homes are licensed facilities. That's why we call the third the license exempt facilities. They're not subject to the same requirements. So different child care programs in California allow families to choose different types of settings. The CalWORKs and the alternative payment programs allow families to choose all 3 settings, and they are guaranteed certain health and safety standards in those programs. The general child care, state preschool, and migrant and severely handicapped programs only allow families to choose from centers and family child care homes. And these programs meet health and safety standards and are required to include developmentally appropriate activities. The other 2 programs, CalWORKs and alternative payment, can include these developmentally appropriate activities, but there is no state requirement that they do that.
Okay, before we get into administration and funding, for the new members or members from this isn't a familiar topic, let me take a break here. Are there any questions about what's been said so far?
Other than, Mr. Chair, I didn't see in either of the 2 reports, how much of this funding is going to each of the 58 counties and what's sort of the per capita funding, because I know if you said LA County, it'd be like this giant number, but it wouldn't have a comparative to other counties. Is there a per capita chart somewhere?
We could certainly put that together for you and get that to you. The share of the eligible population varies by county, and what we'll get into in a couple pages is that the reimbursement rates vary by the relative costs in each county, so the per child expenditure will vary. Roughly in CalWORKs, we spend around $7,000 per student per child for a full-time equivalent child. In the non-voucher programs, which are the general child care and state preschool programs, the full-time equivalent rate is quite a bit higher, closer to $10,000 per student. And then state preschool, the rate is lower. It's about $4,000 per pupil. But we could get you a county-by-county breakout of what the current funding structure looks like.
And does a license exempt provider look different than the first two categories? If so, how?
So the license exempt provider is only, we don't have sort of demographic characteristics about the providers, but they are different in that they care for fewer children. They are not licensed formally. They are not required to have any particular education completion. There's no requirements there. But there are, generally we hear that there are license exempt providers who move from license exempt into being family child care home providers over time because they sort of start to understand what this business looks like. They can attract additional clientele into their home, but that's the extent to which we know about the license exempt providers.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, Mr. Senator Stone.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation so far. In the stage 1, 2, and 3, I noticed that in the non-Cal Works childcare that you've got 3,000 slots for handicapped and severely handicapped and migrant children. Are there any prohibitions from any families with developmentally disabled children from being in stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3?
There are not.
Okay,
no.
so there are opportunities for them, because I was concerned about the low number, and I
Yes,
want to make sure
yes,
that our
they are.
developmentally disadvantaged has opportunities.
Yes, I should add that the severely handicapped program actually only is in the Bay Area. It's only a program in the Bay Area, and it's for children can remain in the program until they're 21 years of age.
Okay.
So it's a unique program.
Thank you.
And quite small. Only about 130 of the 3,000 children in that figure are served in that program.
Thank you for clarifying that.
But if you're a former CalWORKS recipient and therefore in stage 1, 2, or 3, and you have a child with, then you would automatically be in stage 1, 2, or 3. It would preclude you from being in those programs.
Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if $7,000 per child per year, and if they're involved with a center, it could be $10,000?
Yes, if they're in the general child care program, the full-time equivalent cost is around $10,000.
And then how would that compare to other states?
In terms of what we pay, so California is very unique in the way that it structures its child care system, in that what we'll get into actually in a couple pages is we have a method of contracting with actual brick and mortar providers on the ground at the state level. We directly contract with particular providers, which is very unique to other states. Most other states just provide services through the voucher-based program. If you talk about the value of the voucher across states, California's vouchers are worth more, in part a reflection of the higher cost of living in California. Most states are a bit behind in updating the value of their voucher due to declining revenues during the recession. I think the latest data that we have about the relative purchasing power across states is from 2012, I believe, and California is relatively generous, but we don't have the most recent data, but we could try to get that for you.
So just on a different tack, what, in personal income taxes, what does the average resident of California pay in personal income tax?
What they pay in personal income taxes, I don't have that figure in front of me, but I could certainly try to get it for you.
Okay, is it $2,000 per person?
In personal,
Yeah, we can get that information.
We can
for you.
certainly.
I'm trying to figure out how many people it takes to pay for.
For one voucher, sure. We could certainly get that
How
for
we're all
you
chipping in for.
for this particular service. Yeah, we could get that. We can get all of that for you.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. That segues nicely into the administration and funding of the program. So
Yes. So on page 4, 2 state agencies administer the child care programs. The Department of Social Services administers CalWORKS Stage 1, which is then executed by the county welfare departments. And then the California Department of Education administers the rest of the programs. Why we have this split is largely historical in nature. The state preschool program is just celebrated, I think, its 40th birthday. or 40th anniversary. It started within school districts, and so that's how it kind of grew up out of the California Department of Education, why CDE ended up administering the program. And then the legislature chose to place the alternative payment program with the Department of Education as well, because they were already administering the other programs. When welfare reform happened in the late 90s, there was a decision to split the administration of the CalWORKs Child Care Program between the Department of Social Services and the Department of Education, because when families first come into CalWORKs, they're working with the social services arm, and so families can most quickly get connected to services at a one-stop shop at the county welfare department. So that's sort of why we have this bifurcation of the programs across the two different departments. But I can't speak to the political elements.
Offline.
So as you'll see from the chart on our handout, the split in terms of federal and state funding is 2/3 state, 1/3 federal. We received the Child Care Development Fund, which is our funding mechanism from the feds. It's governed by what's called the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which will be talked about in one of your later panels. You'll also note that there is Proposition 98 General Fund as a part of these programs. That funding supports the Part Day State Preschool Program. That's currently the only program we fund within Proposition 98. So moving to page 5, how do we actually pay providers once?
Chair, just,
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Senator Moore.
just why do we use brackets on the subtotals?
That is a formatting decision of my office.
Okay. I'm an accountant, so
Okay.
when you bracket, it means it's a negative.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So I think that's how we try to designate subtotals in our tables.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm green, so just be patient with me.
No.
Good question. And you're right, that is an accounting.
So in terms of how do we actually pay the providers, there are two primary mechanisms which I touched on earlier. The first are vouchers. These offer the greatest amount of choice to families. Families can select any provider near their home, near where they work, and they can choose any setting. The voucher that a family has is worth up to a certain amount. So the state sets a reimbursement ceiling. So if a family chooses a provider that charges less than the reimbursement ceiling, the state will simply reimburse the provider based on whatever they're charging. If the family chooses a provider that charges more than the reimbursement ceiling, then the family has to make up the difference between the value of the voucher and the rate the provider is charging. We refer to these ceilings as the regional market rates. They're county-based rates, so there are 58 different rates, and they're based on statewide surveys. Historically, the state has set the reimbursement ceilings at the 85th percentile of the distribution in each county. Last year, the state updated the survey from the 85th percentile of the 2005 survey to the 85th percentile of the 2009 survey, but those rates were then deficited 10%. So county by county, what percentile a rate is at will vary due to this deficit factor, but overall everyone receives sort of a 10% reduction in the 85th percentile. So those are the new rate ceilings. So you can see that the regional market rates really vary by county. We have an example in the last bullet under vouchers. In Kings County, full-time care for a 4-year-old, the maximum reimbursement is $710, and in Marin County is $1,124. The second method of reimbursement that the state has are what we refer to as the contracted providers, where the Department of Education contracts with individual providers throughout the state to provide services. Services are provided only in centers and family child care homes. There are no licensed exempt providers under these types of reimbursements. In addition, the state pays a uniform rate across the state. We refer to this as the standard reimbursement rate. And it's based on the attendance of each child throughout the state. So you can see in the last bullet that the full-time care for a 4-year-old under the standard reimbursement rate is $752 everywhere in every county.
Is there any rationale for the reimbursement rate or the voucher rate, the RMR, varying rather greatly from county to county, and yet the the standard reimbursement being set?
It's really, the difference in these two is really a historical factor. I mean, basically, the standard reimbursement rate grew out of school districts providing state preschool originally, the state then backfilling the cost of that program after Prop 13, and then the legislature taking steps to equalize the funding rates across the different school districts. And so over time, we sort of developed this standard reimbursement rate, but it was happening independently of what we were doing on the voucher side. So there wasn't necessarily a policy discussion about whether or not we should have regional rates for the contracted programs versus a standard rate.
I would assume, and we'll probably hear from testimony from folks in public and panel testimony, that the 752 standard rate is pretty good for Kings County and not very good for Marin.
Exactly right. And in fact, in those higher cost counties, under the contracted programs, these are the programs that have to include developmentally appropriate activities. So these providers are, in some cases, being reimbursed at lower rates for higher standards.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Stone.
Oh, Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're coming up with the value of the vouchers, you come up with this very archaic formula of a 2009 survey minus 10%. First question is, when was the last survey done? And why aren't we just reflecting a negative off the present survey as to the amount that's being allocated?
Yes, so the most recent survey was completed in 2014. So we have that most recent data. It would be a budget decision regarding updating the survey. To update to the 2014 survey at the 85th percentile, which has been the policy of the state for quite a while, would be quite expensive. We estimate somewhere around $370 million. So there would be a question of where does the legislature want to put investments? Would it be entirely in rates and slots, that sort of thing?
I'm just suggesting a non-archaic representation of what that is. It may be the 85th percentile of 2014 minus 22%. I don't know, maybe there's a political thing. I always say, oh my God, you're cutting us back 22% of what the average is for taking care of these kids. But I still think we need to be transparent and really understand what the real costs are, to know what the challenges are in the state, so that as we improve better financially, which we hope that the state does, that we can ensure that our providers are paid appropriately and we get our kids taken care of. So I would just throw a suggestion out there that we should use contemporary data. And if we have to, let us know what that delta is, that we're not funding that would be considered to be state of the industry, state of the art in taking care of these kids.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Morlack.
Could you explain the regional market rate? Who are you surveying?
So the Department of Education contracts with an independent firm, puts out a request for proposals to contract with an independent firm, and they do a survey in which they create a stratified random sample of providers within counties, and they create zip code profiles in order to be able to create distributions for every county.
So what is a provider? Is that someone that contracts with the Department of Education, or is it the free market?
It is the free market.
Okay.
So it's both family child care homes that serve private pay clients, centers that pay private pay clients.
So you've got at least something in there to keep the survey market-based.
That's right. It is market-based, yes. The survey does not include the providers that only serve subsidized children.
Okay, good.
So that the state isn't manipulating, or not manipulating,
Well, it would
but
just spiral
affecting
up. It would never
the
end
survey.
if you did that. Thank you.